1 Corinthians 15:33 says, "Bad company corrupts good morals." The people our kids spend time with and the friends that they make play a huge part in their development. After all, for kids, at least in public school, they spend nearly as much time during the day with their friends as they do with their parents. This makes it vitally important that the time that they spend with friends won't be time that compromises their spirituality. How do you handle the transition as they move away from being led by you to being influenced by their peers? The first 5 years or so of a kid's life is spent primarily under a parent's guidance and protection. After that, kids begin school and they spend time with teachers and friends, and all of a sudden there's this other influence in our kids' lives that's very important to them. And unfortunately, that influence is another kid who we don't have control over. So how do we handle to prepare our kids for this transition?
One of the things is just that communication, right? That we're talking to our kids about what they experience when they're away from us. And if we're in the habit of talking to them about what they're doing when they're away from us, if they stop at some point, that's an indication there may be something going wrong, something they're ashamed to talk to us about. So you just have to look for those indicators and remind them.
Every time our kids go somewhere, go to school, I always tell them before they leave the house, remember who you are and who you represent. And I don't know, Mackenzie always laughs, "Are you going to tell me?" And I'm like, "You already know." But, it's just something for them to think about because they have our last name. So whatever they do is going to reflect off of us. Plus, it's going to reflect off of God, especially if people know that we're Christians and we've taught them a certain way and they're behaving differently. So just giving them that reminder before they leave the house is just something, it's just that last little reminder before they leave, Just because you're gone doesn't change who you are, what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, like Kyle said, communication's critical. You always want your child to be able to talk to you about anything at all. So try to talk to them a lot. And if one of their friends is not doing what's right, we address those specific issues and talk about it directly.
Yeah, we ask our kids lots of questions about who they talk to at school, what they're like. We try to get to know their friends from school outside of school, try to invite them over, try to get to know them ourselves to see what we observe. And then we talk about what those kids are doing that's right and what's wrong. And if we feel like we need to steer them to other kids, we talk about that. Because sometimes it's, unfortunately, choosing the better of two evils sometimes. They may not go to school with any other Christians. They may not. So then it's talking about, let's look for other kids that are respectful to teachers, who don't use profanity, don't do these things. They may not share our Christian beliefs, but maybe they're religious and share at least moral beliefs,
You also have to build that strong family relationship that they're not afraid to come to you if something with the friend comes up. They can't be afraid to talk to you about it. Feel like they can bring it up. You ask them, "How was your day? What'd you do?" All this, but sometimes, they'll say fine because they're not sure how. But if they know they can come to you, a lot of times they'll just come, "Hey, can I ask you this? Or can we talk?" And so you just have to have that bond with your kids.
Obviously, we want our kids to spend time with people who are not bad influences on them, but sometimes we're not going to be successful. Sometimes they will have that one friend who we wish they weren't hanging around. So what do we do in this situation when our kids do have that friend who isn't a good influence on them?
We definitely limit or eliminate the time they spend with them outside of school. And then, again, I try to encourage them to pick good friends, try and steer them towards other kids. I remember for at least one of our children, second grade was really the key grade for our boys, where they could start differentiating between good kids and bad kids. That seemed to be the grade level where it was like, oh, I do have choice in this matter. I don't have to hang out with these kids. And that's a crucial moment when a kid learns that, oh, I can start spending time with these kids over here that are behaving better. So trying to encourage them, but not force it. Hey, you can't talk to that person, because it's a hard concept to learn, to still be kind and loving and good example, but yet not be their best friend.
There have been one or two instances where our kids gravitated to a young boy that was not a good kid. I mean, it's clearly evident, and it's not the easy or popular thing to do, but we just wouldn't let them associate with him outside of school. And granted, that's a pretty rare incident, but there were one or two incidences where we just had to say, no, you can't go over there.
And also explaining to the kid, these are the things that we see that we don't like, right? I mean, it's not just we don't like that kid. We love, he's a kid. We want to help him if possible. But these are the things he's doing that are the reason that we don't want you to be around him.
I think also it's important to, for our kids, I think we've said this a couple times throughout multiple topics we've talked about, is having our kids have a goal in mind and striving to be like Christ and striving to live lives for God. And if they're doing that, they're naturally going to gravitate towards people who are thinking the same way they are, doing the same things they are, interested in striving for the same goals that they are. And so if we can help our kids build that foundation of God, it's just going to naturally help them pick better influences in their lives. In picking the influences in their lives, we want our kids to pick good influences, and often some of those peers come from church. But that's not always the case. Sadly, not all kids who go to church are going to be good influences on our kids, unfortunately. So how does this situation change when the bad influence is coming from someone who we really can't avoid because they're a member of our congregation? Or does it change?
I think about what Paul wrote to Timothy in 1 Timothy 4, verse 12, where he said, "Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, in purity." I think we really need to train our kids to be leaders and not always followers. I mean, they need to follow Christ. They need to follow the right paths. But when it comes to their relationship with their peers, they need to be leaders in the sense they're going to set the right example and not allow themselves to be looked down upon because they're not, they may be looked down upon, but they're not going to think less of themselves because they're doing what's right. Even when it's their brethren in Christ who are not choosing the right way, they need to be the good example.
And ask them questions on, why do you think this other kid is making these decisions? Why do you think? What do you see? It's amazing how they usually see it. They can say, well, their parents aren't doing this or that, and pointing out those things, getting them to think through why they're not being a good influence the way they should. And like Kyle said, say, well, here's your opportunity to be a leader, a good example to them on how we should behave. I will say that if it is happening in the congregation, maybe it's a peer that is, maybe you allow your child to sit by other kids at worship. That can happen, and it's a good thing normally. But what if there's another child that's causing a disruption to where your child's not able to worship the way they should? What do you do? And we've had that situation before, and what we told them is, we expect you, God expects our worship to be from the heart. He expects us to fully worship Him. This is preventing you to do that. You're either going to need to address it with that child, or you're going to have to start sitting with us again. And they don't want to do that. So, usually it's resolved on their own, because, they have to learn that just because you're inside the building doesn't mean the devil's not still trying to work in certain areas and tempt us.
I think there's an important lesson there to teach your kids too. We don't put our faith in people, right? We put our faith in God, because people are going to let you down. It happens. You see it occasionally. A spouse cheats on a spouse and just leaves, and they're gone, and you're like, well, how could they do that? They were leading the singing last Sunday morning. We can't put our faith in other people. Even if it's an older high school student that they look up to that's not doing what's right, they're just a person who can choose not to follow God and not do what's right. Our faith is in God. It's not in human beings.
Can't talk about friends without talking about the flip side, the bullies. And we often refer to it as bullying, but being unkind can manifest itself in many different ways. Many kids have that person at school who is mean to them or picks on them or maybe just leaves them out or makes them feel down on themselves. Or maybe our kid could even become the bully themselves. How do we combat this? What is it that we can teach our kids to help them handle situations with other kids who are unkind to them?
I think this one, a lot of it depends on how old your kid is. Because when they're younger, they're going to need more of your assistance as a parent. When we had this situation when the boys were younger, we tried to teach them, look, bullies, they're miserable people. Their goal is to tear others down and make them miserable just like they are. And our self-worth comes from God. And but sometimes it is necessary to get a teacher involved or a school involved. It's our job as parents to protect them. And when they're young, they're not going to have the wisdom and the maturity to know how to do that. So now as they get older, they get into middle school, high school, it's not always appropriate to do that. And they may run the risk of stop telling you things if you tried to overstep your bounds. I know personally, I stopped telling my parents things because it became more of an issue than it should have been. So I thought, well, I don't want that to happen again, so I'm just not going to tell them anything anymore. And so I think now when we run into that situation with the boys, if someone's being a bully to them or whatever, we just talk about it. What did they say? How did you respond? Here's some things you can try. If go through possible solutions. And I've asked them before, do you want me to get involved in this? And most times they say, no, I can handle it, But I think it's important not to just take it into your own hands, not let them know, because then you broke that confidence that they came to you with that. But again, it's really age driven, I think, on the bullying.
I agree. And the other thing that I'm thinking about is that I'm glad that my kids have a dad and a mom, because mom tends to be the more of the protector and the nourisher, and she is really concerned about how they feel and bolstering their self-esteem and those sorts of things. And it's not that I don't care about those things, but I tend to be the one that says, you know what, you need this challenge, it's good for you to have some adversity, and you're going to experience that later in your life. I'm glad there's this time in your life where, as long as it's not terribly severe, beyond reason, that they're experiencing some discomfort because the way somebody else is treating them. Partly because, when Jesus said, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets, that golden rule we talk about a lot, that he had already told them earlier in that same message that they are to love their enemies and bless those who curse them, do good to those who hate you, he says, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Well, those are difficult things to put to practice, and you kind of have an opportunity in your childhood to put that to practice where your life's not at risk and maybe your job's not at risk. It's just uncomfortable and unpleasant. And so kids need that nourishment, they need that protection, but they also need that opportunity. Or we as parents, I guess, can look at it as an opportunity for our kids to understand and actually put into practice some of these principles.
Continuing the discussion of bullying, it becomes much harder for kids to avoid bullies when that bully or that person who's being unkind to them is someone at church. We're usually closer to the families that we go to church with, so we're often much closer to the families where this unkind behavior may be coming from. So does this change the way we approach this situation or the way we handle bullying with our kids?
So we've never really had to address this, in a church instance personally, but I think of Matthew 18:15 that says, if your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. Now, kids aren't at a mature enough level, I don't think, where they can go to each other and have a mature conversation about that, but I definitely would think that parents should address it with the other parent, you know, and if they're both trying to raise their kids in the proper manner, I gotta believe that two sets of Christian parents can talk about that and work it out, you know, instruct their kids in the proper way to treat each other.
Yeah, I had thought of that verse as well. You know, and it also, you know, hopefully, like you said, we can resolve that situation with the parents of that other child. But if we can't, it still shows our kids. We still teach our kids how we would handle that type of situation. Is we're going to try to talk it out. We're going to try to talk to either the parents or talk to this kid individually. We're going to try to resolve it and discuss it and work with one another, because we're Christians. We want to work together. We're striving for the same goals. We want to help each other to accomplish those goals.
You know, to go along with that, I also think about how, you know, in the Corinthian church, there were actually brethren suing other brethren, and Paul gave them instruction and basically said that it was shameful the way they were behaving, and that it would be better for them to allow themselves to be cheated, you know, than to do this, and to apply that principle to our conversation. And it's really easy for me as a parent to become really emotionally involved when my kid is emotionally hurting in some way, maybe because there's some other kid at church that has mistreated them. But maybe I need to step back as a parent and start thinking, is this really a big deal? You know, is this something I really need to make an issue of? Sometimes it is. But other times it's like, well, you know, I'm going to think on this a day or two, and after a day or two's passed, those two kids are the best of friends again, you know? And if I would have gone to that parent and made an issue of it, I would have made a mountain out of a molehill. I would have really caused an issue. So sometimes it's better just to kind of let ourselves to be cheated for the sake of the brethren, and understanding we're all going to make mistakes, and not run to the parent of some other child every time a kid has their feelings hurt.
And sometimes your kid may tell you about an incident or incidents happening in their Bible classes where they see another child maybe not being bullied, but making them, maybe that child feels bad about themselves, or other kids are being unkind to that child or whatever, and your kid notices it and it bothers them. And I think it kind of goes back to something Kyle said earlier in one of our other sessions. We need to teach our kids to be leaders. We need to teach them how to stand up for those who don't know how to stand up for themselves. And you know, if they witness someone not treating someone in the right way, stand up and say, you know, because they're being treated right, but say, hey, you're not being kind to this person. You need to be kind to them. You know, and teach them to stand up for those people. You know, they can do that at an early age.
And even teach them to be the friend to the one that's being bullied, because a lot of times every kid's been through that, and just remember how you felt and make that extra step to include that child, or go sit by them or something. I mean, kids are mean from time to time, and it's just part of the course, I guess, unfortunately. But if they remember how they felt when they were in that situation, a lot of times they can stand up and be that good friend. And you never know what develops from that. It can become one of the most fruitful friendships.
Just an aspect of our society today is, I don't think it's new necessarily, it's just that the manner in which we do it is new, and that is we're always taking pictures of our kids and posting pictures of our kids and talking about what our kids are doing and all of that, and sometimes that stirs up some sort of jealousy or envy among brethren. And so as we think about, you know, the relationship our kids have with other kids at church, one of the things we can do as parents is just make sure that we're teaching our kids humility, and teaching our kids that they're really to be servants and not always to be put on a pedestal and expect everybody else to praise them and think highly of them. But, you know, it's humility at service, even when it's difficult. It's making friends with people sometimes that are kind of quirky or odd or whatever, but they need a friend too.
Well, I think that was a great discussion, so I thank you for your input.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Facebook page for notifications about more content like this.